morning, everybody out there. This is the Better People, Better Business podcast, and have another cracking individual who I'm having the opportunity to talk with today, Kelly Windle, Dr. Kelly Windle. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute delight. And just as a bit of an introduction, which we always do, just to help people understand who you are, at least in part. Dr. Kelly Windle is a psychologist and executive leader who speaks on the topics of the future of work, leadership and culture. She has 15 years global leadership experience and 5 tertiary qualifications, because one is just never enough, is it?
Not enough.
Never enough. Kelly's advised some of the world's leading organisations on how to evolve to better meet the future. A lot of people speak on the future of work, but Kelly's thought leadership is focused on an interesting and important part of the future of work. That's around the shared commitment to the future. She asks and answers the questions of, how do we mobilise people to swiftly grow and become future ready? It's a great question, and it's really lovely to have Kelly on the show today. So thank you, Kelly. One thing I was just going to say from the start, it's really great for everybody who's listening. We really appreciate you having a listen, and I think yet again you're going to find some cracking, useful information. I've known Kelly for quite a few years now. We'll just leave it at that. And always enjoy the conversation and the wisdom that she brings. And I don't think today is going to be anything short of equally as wonderful as usual. So one of the things we start off with, Kelly, with every person who I have the pleasure of chatting with, is a simple question, which is, the frame of this is better people, better business. When I say that, what do you hear? What do you go to? What do you think about from how you see the world?
Yeah, it's such an awesome name. I remember when you launched this podcast and I went, better people, better business. That's why I do what I do. So I don't know if I've ever told you this story, actually, Andrew. I'm a psychologist is my background, and you do 6 years training, and the last 2 are specialised. And so I was in my 4th year going, I don't know where I want to specialise. And I was also working for an airline at the time, so I was a frontline leader. And I just kept going to work in context of studying psychology, and I'd picked up a subject of organisational psychology, which is psychology in the workplace. And so I was going to work with all this sort of theory buzzing around my hair, and I was looking around at the workplace, and I noticed a very distinct pattern that when people were well and they were feeling supported and they were happy, and I was a cabin supervisor at the time, so I was in control of setting the tone a lot for a team. Best leadership lesson ever, flying. Very concentrated leadership lessons when you're in a dynamic environment like that. And I'd already noticed and learnt in my time flying that how I showed up to work completely set the tone and dictated how my crew then showed up to work. And it was completely the difference between whether we had an awesome trip or whether we didn't, whether we had good customers through or whether we had annoying, grumpy customers through, whether things went well or everything went south. I literally concluded this all comes down to the attitude I bring to work and how I transfer that to the people I'm leading. And then in my 4th year of studies, I'm in the airline, and I'd got a bit more involved in a few committees like health and safety and things like that. And I started noticing that that's not just micro, that's macro. And when the business was making decisions that demonstrated care and connection to the crew, and crew were responding to that, things were awesome. Like you'd walk around crib rooms and you'd be on flights and you'd be handing over planes, and everyone just seemed in a happier mood, and customers seemed happier, and business just kind of rolled on. And on the days or the weeks when decisions were made that indicated not listening, not caring, prioritising money over service or everything else we'd been trained to deliver, and essentially a business signalling, no, we're over here and you're just working for us, everything went south. And it was so obvious to me, and it literally boiled down to better people is better business. It's better customer service. It's better engagement at work. It's better well-being for crew. I would see the difference. I'd feel it in myself as a frontline worker when your business is making better choices for you and you feel like you're working together with that. The loyalty and the sense of commitment skyrockets. But most importantly for me, given I was studying psychology, the well-being skyrockets as well. So this is a very long story and long answer to your question, but it's always resonated with me, better people, better business. And it's actually, Andrew, The reason I chose to then spend my next 2 years and my master's studying organisational psychology and not a different field, because I went, wow, 80+% of our population go to work every day. 80+% are at risk of not coming home feeling well or energised or inspired, because businesses are not even aware of some of the things they're doing. So I chose my field because I believe in better people equals better business. They're not in contradiction. You better one, you better the other. Yeah. And I so believe that. I've built my career around it, and I'm focused now on helping businesses and people do that in a way that makes sure we also have a better future.
That's cool. That's a great story, and thank you for sharing. No, I hadn't heard that before. No, so it's very interesting. One of the comments, and this often comes up when I've talked to different people, is we talk about better people, better business, and one of the frames that I always like to make sure I'm very clear on is we're not saying the business is a thing. Business is nothing more than a bunch of people. So they're just people, and it's hard. It's just so better people, better business. Well, yes, but I think one of the things that we can often forget, and I'm sure you see this with the work you do, that people sometimes frame the business as a living thing, as if it has its own, apart from a piece of paper in some sort of filing cabinet, it has some sort of existence. I'm curious, like when you're doing that type of work, how have you seen that play out? Have you seen it play out in useful ways and also unuseful ways, this sort of creating this thing that sits over here? Just interested.
Awesome question. And I actually have two responses if I can. One's quite an academic one. So I actually have an academic answer to your question. My PhD was in the field of what's called psychological contracts. So a psychological contract is essentially what the individual employee perceives has been promised and exchanged between them and their employer, which immediately from a research perspective begs the question of, well, what is employer? Which is exactly what you're asking. Is it this entity? Is it representatives of the entity? Which representatives? Who, where, how many? Is it direct manager? Is it senior leader? Is it other employees? Is it the company's reputation? Fascinating. So my whole research had to really actually unpack what is this concept of organisation, because I agree with you, it's simply a system of people. That's all it is. All businesses are a group of humans coming together, hopefully for united goals. Sometimes yes, sometimes not. And it doesn't matter what we sort of build tangibly in and around that. At the end of the day, a business is still just a social system. And as a social system, it doesn't have a centre or singular point to peg to go, oh, my contract is with you. So it's really interesting. So academically, it was fascinating exploring that. And in parallel, I was consulting at the time to many organisations around a lot of things like culture change and organisational design and development and engagement. And the question always boiled down to how do we get our people really clear on what we need and really engaged and motivated behind that, and then loyal and staying with that. So in a sense, they're saying, how do we create a really awesome psychological contract? I mean, you've got your written contract, but then you've got this more important emotionally led contract that the minute it started breaching, we have all these emotional reactions to, and you start to see engagement, in particular loyalty and that sense of connection to an entity start to disappear, and that can erode really gradually over time. And where I've seen it, this management of the contract and this management of the relationship, which is what we're talking about, with an entity, where that gets managed really well is when the business has very competent representatives who are leaning into their role of, my primary leadership role is as a relationship manager. I need to actively, proactively manage the relationship that we've established with every individual in this system. And I need to watch for when we make changes in that system for how that then impacts the felt experience of the relationship. We talk a lot about experience at work. There's experience of work, and then there's the experience of the relationship you have with the system in which you are part of. In other words, my relationship with my organisation or my business. Yep. So the leaders that are doing that well are doing three things. They are visible, highly visible, And that doesn't, and people go, oh, but I'm not an extrovert. Oh, that's my favorite, most common one. I go, well, some of the most effective visible leaders aren't. It's irrelevant. Your introversion extroversion scale does not impact your ability to be visible or not, just changes maybe the mechanisms by which you are. So visibility, consistency is the other one. So they are visible, they are consistent in their visibility, consistent in their messaging, consistent in the environment and the experience that they're creating for people, regardless of who that is. And the third thing that these leaders are, visible, consistent, they actively demonstrate care. And this is what that's how I define connection. So leaders who are truly connected, there's a lot of language around connected leadership at the moment. I define connected leadership as leaders who are actively demonstrating care. And that's not just communication. I've let them know. Of course they know I care. I told them I did. I'm like, that's really, yeah, you know, if your best friend came around and said, oh, but I told you that, and then acted completely differently, would you be comfortable? That's not really, it's the same thing in a workplace, exactly the same. So leaders who are starting to think, and this is very much, you see a lot of younger leaders coming through and they're instinctively doing this because that's how they want to be led. Some of our more mature leaders have grown up in a world where that wasn't what was valued in leadership, but increasingly it is. And sociologically now, with all the changes in the world and the experiences of the pandemic and workers coming into the home more and that pastoral care element that's starting to be demanded of leaders, it is expected now that that is a valued skill, and it is a skill. It is a skill that can be learned. All three are visibility, consistency, and active demonstration of care. These can all be taught. And when that is done well by key representatives of the entity, the social system that we call a business, that's when you see that relationship managed really well, and that's where you see it play out. The flip side of that is when it's not. What happens is day in, day out, my research showed that all these mini breaks, or we call them breaches, to this contract. So, and that could be as simple as the employee going, oh, they promised that, but that clearly doesn't happen. Okay, so that term of my contract changes. Can be in relation to them. It can be them watching peers and the treatment of them as well. And we have these tiny little breaches, and they happen daily. And in unto themselves, they won't break a contract, but the accumulated effect over time will ultimately end up in a breach and violation of that emotional contract and social and psychological contract. And that's where you start to see a lot of negative behaviours play out, and you start to see the effect on culture, and then you start to see the effect on how they're treating customers, employer brand, customer brand, and it kind of goes on from there. So again, a long-winded answer, but hopefully a few ideas in there, and a bit of an academic as well as a practical experience response to a very good question.
Oh, thank you. Great. No, and it was cracking response. And for people listening, my suggestion is hit pause, rewind about 2 minutes, and listen to that a couple of times. There is a lot of gold in that piece that was shared from Kelly. So, 5 minutes, whatever it was, just go back and listen. Really important. A lot of really interesting pieces, and a couple of key points. And so that was gold. And I love the frame of the psychological contract. And I think there's a whole bunch of people now going, hang on a minute. I get what Kelly's saying. Absolutely rings true. How do I define what might be existing right now? So I have people working for me, I have a team, I have personnel, I'm working for somebody maybe. What the heck have I signed up? Like, how do I define this psychological contract so that it actually becomes a bit more known and understood? Because I think the subtlety of any psychological contract, work or otherwise, that is not defined, particularly for those who are involved in it, you're at peril of breaking it without consciously realising.
Exactly right.
It's accidental, it's non-intentional, but it happens. So how do we define this one, Kelly? Like, how do we get this on paper without getting it on paper?
It's really interesting, and a lot of the work I end up doing with leaders and companies is exactly to that point, is, how do I manage something that's effectively invisible and at the end of the day exists within the head of an individual? So yes, it exists at the individual employee level, but we also have shared contracts. So I will extend my contract with the business to the experience of my peers as well, starts to inform that. So on paper, what we're now calling this is employee experience. So we have seen a shift, particularly in the last sort of 5 years, from employee engagement towards employee experience. And some people have sort of jumped right onto that, and others are still back in the employee engagement space. And I mean, neither is better than the other. They are, to me, a natural evolution of how we manage culture. So engagement is awesome, but experience is actually a different level again, and far more practical and active for a lot of leaders to directly manage than engagement, because engagement still sits very much at that individual experience. Do I feel engaged? And then am I acting engaged? Whereas employee experience is something that leaders and businesses can manage a bit more proactively. And when they do that with a lens of, okay, and how are we managing this social and psychological contracting that goes on in the business? If we are putting visible and consistent experiences in place, and consistent, really key here, not once a year. We went on a retreat once a year. What an awesome experience. Does not stack up to day in, day out experiences that are really overt and reinforcing of the experience we want to create. Now, when we create an experience, again, it's not one way. It's not event planning. Employee experiences are not events. They're not done with event planning. It all went smoothly. We got great feedback on the form. Tick, tick. Oh, yes, everyone should be very happy.
Happy
Psychological
shoots.
Contract managed. Woo! No,
yes.
these are two-way dialogue. So how are the employee experiences creating conscious and active dialogue around the experience and inviting contributions to it? So if I gave a silver bullet for managing psychological contracts, invite contributions. So if I was in your business, Andrew, and we were doing this live, I would be saying, right, Andrew, here's what we're trying to achieve as a business. What does that mean? Like, why is that important to you to work in a business that's going after that? Let's make sense of that together. And then I'd go, okay, Andrew, how do you want to contribute to that? Here are some of the challenges and the possibilities I'm seeing within it, but what do you want to add? How can you add to that? Like, I'm not scripting you. I'm not coming in saying, I've got this job that needs to be done. I've got these tasks. Do you agree to do that? Very transactional. To move that to a psychological contracting conversation, it's here's the job we think we need done, but ultimately what we're trying to achieve is this. What do you think? How else could you how can you shape that? How can you do that? And as we go more and more into new ways of working and Industry 5.0 and 5 gens at work and all of that side of things that's happening at the moment and future of work, it's even more important to create this sense of ownership and flexibility that comes when you invite contribution from someone. The minute I do that, I'm creating a space for an actual overt exchange where we can go, oh, so that's what you're thinking in this, but actually we need that. Oh, okay, we can come together. So it's no different to negotiating a contract in a boardroom. It's like, well, we're coming from this perspective, but we're coming from this perspective. Okay, let's get together. It's kind of the same. It's just on more of a socio-emotional level. The other question I love asking is, how do you want to contribute to that? Dig down into that. So it's, okay, so what does that look like? And what do you need from me to be able to contribute like that? Which then opens it up for me to say, oh, I can't do that because of these reasons. What else would you need? Or does this change how you might contribute? Is a very different way than me just going, oh, well, you'll need this support from me. So here you go. Okay, good. Get back to me. May or may not have hit the mark with the terms of that. So I'm curious. I mean, you yourself, Andrew, are a business owner.
Yep.
You have built one of these entities of social organisms that we're calling businesses. And I've heard you talk to me before about how you quite actively manage psychological contracts in your business. So I'm actually curious, just to bring it to life a bit more for people as I'm talking, what's running through your head in terms of experiences or examples where you go, oh yeah, I recognize I instinctively did that, or oh, that's what happened there, and yeah, okay, that would have helped. Like, what's coming up for you as an entity that is a better business?
Well, I think we're on the journey to a better business we'll take. And I think that's the cool thing I like about better. It doesn't finish. It's just ongoing. Not best. Best is a less useful term in my world and in my vocabulary. So, yeah, great question. And so first of all, I'd like to say thank you for all those pieces. Again, a whole range of information there around, because I was about to say, so tell us the difference between engagement and experience, and you did beautifully. So for us, and for me, I will happily say I get this wrong regularly, and I think that's a part of this.
Yeah, definitely.
It's that. So to me, the experience conversation also ties in pretty closely with vulnerability, and also a little bit of courage as well.
100%.
Where having that conversation, because we are broadly, and I use a big, broad, sweeping statement here for companies, businesses, organisations, collective people. We are very good at saying, here's your PD, here's your job, just do it. And I'll set a meeting up every week for 30 minutes. We'll tick that little box and away we go.
Support you.
And you know, one of the other ones that I've heard, which has backfired beautifully so many times, is people talk, and I know I've done this, but don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution. Actually, no, bring me your problems. Let's work it out. You know, and I'd love you to think about where you might be able to solve in that, but I'm also comfortable for you to bring me your problems too. So for us, it is like I said, it's a journey. We're still on the journey, and I think it's that co-creation piece, which is, I think, most uncomfortable for everybody. Actually, that question you asked there, like, how do you want to contribute? Here's what we're thinking. Here's what our goal is. Here's what the role is broadly looks like. How do you want to contribute to this? What's the extra 5%? Like, so most people, they're showing up to work might be, I'm going to be, a little bit aggressive on this, 60% showing up. How do you tap into the next 20, 30, or even 40%? And I think that's the work that you're doing. And so for us, it's that, and we don't do this enough. I'll happily say that it's something we're currently doing is this whole piece around. So how do you want to contribute? Here's what we need to get done, but what does that look like to you? How do you fit in? We still need this. And we also want your genius to show up inside this space and to use that in a way that's really meaningful, because how I think it should be done, obviously, for me, I can't do the work, in a lot of cases, can't do the work as good as you can. I know that. That's why you're here. And what I want is for you to show up. So it is about to me, Kelly, it's about the questions. It's about vulnerability. It's about saying, hey, I'm so glad you're here and I really appreciate you showing up, and let's talk about how we can do this better. The better word appears a lot in our conversation.
I love that you used better. There's a motivational speaker, Louise Hay. She's passed on now, but she has some awesome work that she gave the world before she left. And one that always stuck with me, relevant to what we're talking about, she always said, ask for something or better. She said, and don't forget the or better. She said, who are you to constrain things? Who are you to know absolutely this would be the best? Always ask or better and leave that space. And for me, holding the space as a leader to invite contribution, you're right, that takes vulnerability and that takes courage. Why? Because we've trained leaders that they should have all the answers. And we train our knowledge and our expert workers in business especially, and our more mature career stage people coming through, even our grads coming in. We say, oh, you just graduated, you should know everything that's contemporary. The pressure for them to know, oh, that's what it needs to be. We instantly lock down and constrain. And for a lot of people, they can't give more than 60% at work. They've already constrained themselves, or they've been constrained by the expectations. And it's too difficult or too tiring to constantly push and renegotiate against the processes and expectations that are constraining us. So that's a whole nother conversation about how we release and make talent management more flexible in businesses. But I think the example you gave of just holding that space to say, how do you want to contribute? What could that look like? And let's approach this from a perspective of we don't have to have the answers, and we are having a conversation that never hits a full stop. It only ever hits a comma. And I say this sometimes to leaders, and particularly when I'm facilitating and it's a longer term program. Okay, we're coming up to time, so I'm just going to hit a comma here, but this is a comma, not a full stop. I want to keep talking to you. And really sets that expectation that, oh, we're not done, that's okay, relieves the pressure, creates a bit more of a safer space, and just gives people that permission and expectation to go, oh, okay, yeah, let me think through what better looks like and how I might add to that. Suddenly we get above that 60%.
Yeah. And there's some powerful words used in there as part of that, and it's another whole conversational set. But because to me, this work that you're talking to, the psychological contract, also sits right beside this idea of psychological safety.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't acknowledge this contract that exists, then the safety will always be hard to get to. And I'm just having a conversation recently with a CEO where they asked about, how do I get my people to be more engaged and more psychologically safe? And for that particular organisation, my frame of that was we're so often. So one of the things they're doing, they're a high risk industry. They're talking about, we want you to speak up. We want you to, to hold your, And I said, well, it's interesting you want people to speak up, and yet in some levels we haven't even taught them how to speak.
Yeah.
And yet we ask them to go this much further, and they aren't even comfortable in the speak space, let alone the speak up space.
Yeah.
What is, how do you get there? That's the interesting, like for you as a leader, how do you get your people just to speak? But with this, and I'll jump back there, that psychological contract, I'd love to hear your thinking there around, how does that, because it feels like, I'm going to get shot by some people here, but the whole psychological safety is very popular.
Yeah, it's very popular right now. Very popular conversation.
And it needs to be. And when we bring it back to a frame of, I'd love to hear your thought. Like when we talk about the psychological contract, it feels like one way to unlock some of that conversation, because that can feel a little bit overwhelming.
I think it's overwhelming. I think it's also being abused is the wrong word. That's a bit contentious.
Hijacked.
I think like all things that come into fashion, like transformation was a very big buzzword a few years back, very much in fashion. Psychological safety, it can then start to get held up as, I don't feel psychologically safe right now because I don't want to do that. And it's like, well, actually, when we approach things from a psychological contracting point of view, which really, I mean, the fancy word for saying a promise. We've made a promise to each other. And that promise is a commitment to the future together. That's all it is. All the psychological contract is you and me going, yeah, I promise with you, we're going into the future here. So if somebody's saying, I don't feel psychological safety, the psychological contracting or the promise related to that is, okay, what's causing that? Because clearly there's some terms of our contract going on. So help me understand that. And it's interesting sometimes when you push on that and you tap against, okay, you don't feel psychologically safe. I often flip it and go, okay, describe to me what would leave you feeling psychologically safe. And if people can answer that, they're genuinely feeling psychologically unsafe. If they can't, it's generally something else that they're labeling psychologically unsafe because that's a current buzzword. And I'm not saying they're labeling it in a malicious way or a manipulative way. They're just not understanding what it is. So there is, with psychological contracting, and when we start to really overtly manage them, and we're managing our promises in the workplace, we are, again, to your point, taking that vulnerability and courage to say, okay, what needs to enter here for that to happen, for you to feel safe. So you're saying you don't feel like that. Don't tell me what feeling like that would look like. Tell me what needs to occur for you to feel safe. And because that is what we then build into our promise together around how we're going to work together. Because that's all that is, how we work together, what we're promising each other, the experience that we want to create as we work into the future together. That's part of my contract with you. So if I'm assuming and not vocalizing that's going in this direction, and you're assuming and vocalizing it's going in another direction, yeah, at some point I'm going to start going, oh, I'm losing some trust here. And that's an easy bridge from that to, oh, I'm starting to feel a bit psychologically unsafe here, and what's going on? I often say to leaders, permission is insufficient. You need to give permission and process. And essentially that's me saying, you need to manage a contract here. You can't just go, here's my permission. I give you permission to speak up. You also need to go, I give you permission to speak up. Here is how this is the process by which that could look like. That's a psychological expectation right there, right? I'm basically inserting a term into our promise or our contract of here's how we have agreed to speak up.
Yep.
And then from there, you might need to take a lens in a business of, now, do we need to train them in how to do that? Do they know how to use those processes or that way? Or that might just be sufficient for people to then go, oh, okay, right. And then what the leader needs to do is model that. The other question I get asked a lot is by leaders is, how do I create trust? I need to create trust to create psychological safety to get people to speak up.
Yes.
And it's a really simple answer. You want trust? Offer trust. It's the psychological contract, the promises we make, that relationship we have at work. It's an exchange. It's a two-way exchange. And we tend to mirror and map that. It's like any relationship. Somebody gives you a gift for your birthday. What's happening for you? You're like thrilled, it's my birthday. A lot of people go, I must remember when their birthday is so I can reciprocate. Same thing at work. If I want you to trust me, I'm going to actively show you I trust you. I'm saying in doing that, that's my expectation, is that trust is implied. We start from a position of trust, not we have to build it. So I trust you to do that. That's me going, okay, this is a promise into the future. I know I'm going to expect to see that back at some point. And to take that even further, you can make that overt to say, it's this very simple statement. I'm astonished more leaders don't use it. Is, Andrew, I trust you've come to me asking if you can do this. I totally trust you to do it. Yeah, we're clear on the outcome. I trust you to do that. Let me know what you need from me in order to do that. But I trust you to do it. You can be so explicit without having to say, let's quickly just talk about the terms of our relationship here.
Psychological contract, yeah.
Yeah, you can actually just lift up that and then just go. The last team I led, I used to often have meetings. I'm a big thinker and I'd have all these ideas. So I'd pull everyone together. I'd go, right, guys, here's my vision. And then I'd go, right, how do we make that happen? I deliberately wouldn't tell them how I thought we should get there. And I still do that in my business today. My business manager, Talia, and I am constantly going, here's what I'm thinking we need to achieve. And then I go, how do we get there? I don't know. And she'll go, well, you could do it. And I go, I would never have thought of that. Awesome. So it's a very clear modeling of the type of relationship I want with my team, which is empowerment, two-way, support, constantly asking, what do you need from me to do that? Rather than telling you what you need from me to do that.
Yes.
Again, I'm setting all of these expectations. Now, to your point before, I get it wrong more than I get it right, and I know all the theory. So it's not as simple as process steps, tick, I've managed the contract. But when we come in with the vulnerability and the courage and the intention and the dialogue, what happens again is we're just inviting their contribution into our relationship. We're saying this is co-created. You used that word before, co-creation, Andrew, and it's just critical, I think, to create employee experiences that lift people above the 60% contribution mark and keep them wanting to work with you. If it's not co-created, we lose the inspiration, right?
Yeah, it just becomes work, the four-letter version, not the fun one. It's interesting. Two things for people listening there. Two questions that Kelly keeps coming back to and cycling through, which I really think are important. That first one around, how would you like to contribute to that? So it's about the invite and it's about the openness. And be mindful when you ask that question, be ready for the answer. It's not a token thing, it's a real thing. So I think that, again, I've seen enough leaders who say, how would you like to contribute? I'd like, no, bang, over, game, finished, like it's done. So be mindful that if you're going to introduce that, be ready for some unusual framing there. And if it's the first time you've done it, it will be clunky, and that's okay. Clunky will work. The second one, but I think is equally as important, probably puts the icing on the cake. Like we've got this beautiful cake now, we've got the icing, which is what do you need from me to make that possible? What do you need? So I think if there's people, because I'm also suspecting there's some people out there sitting, listening, kind of going, man, where do I begin? And I think these two questions is a great place just to begin. Don't overthink this. Don't go into sessions where you need to have everybody define their psychological contracts.
No, don't do that. That's like the worst thing you could do. We don't need to over-engineer this. It's just about creating the space. Yeah. I think you're right. You start there and you can also finish there sometimes too. I do have leaders sometimes say, oh, but what if they do come up with something that I then go, oh, no, we can't do that. I'm like, well, two things. That's then the conversation to be had that helps us align, and that helps them then make a counter offer. So just because they're making an offer of how they could contribute doesn't mean you have to accept it.
Yes.
But it's helpful to know where they're starting from. And then it's just, well, don't slam it down so they don't make another offer. Explain why or how that offer might not fit, and do they have a workaround? People normally get there. But the other way to manage that too, if you're a little bit, but I definitely can't have them going in that direction. It's like, okay, so be clear on your non-negotiables. And that's where you start. You go, these are the non-negotiable terms of our contract, is the academic way of saying it. The practical way a leader might say that would be, right, what's absolutely can't be changed here is that we're being asked to do this, and the business has decided to measure it in this way for these reasons. That's the only constraint we're working around. How do you think we need to go about this? I've also seen leaders and coach leaders, particularly when they're new to role, I'll say pick your no more than 3 non-negotiables, so that when you first sit down with a team, this is what's really important to me. Safety in the workplace is really important to me. I will never, ever compromise on that, and I will be the first to pull myself and others up on that. You can guarantee that. Everything else around there, I really want your input too, but please make sure it's from a frame of this. That's not me dictating how they need to behave. That's me setting really clear expectations of this is what's super important, and you are always going to come up against me if I feel that this is being broken or attacked. But then beyond that, let's go. How do you want to contribute? How can I help? All of that. So, keep it simple, like it's important.
Yeah, it is, and I think having that definition. And not only the leader being visible, but making their thinking visible, to use your visible frame, is powerful. 2 reasons. 1, allows conversation, but 2, if someone can't operate in that context, it allows them to see that and then to make choices.
Absolutely.
Because, let's be honest, it ain't all beer and skittles or roses, whatever the frame you want to use. Sometimes it won't work.
Yeah.
And sometimes these promises, and I love the frame of the promises, that shift of thinking about the psychological contract to the promises that we make, often so unsaid, but they're still there. But sometimes it means that there's possibly too many promises, or the person actually, to talk about the trust piece, they can't offer trust back, and it just may not work.
Yeah,
and that's okay as well.
Like, that's okay. A good outcome from managing promises in the workplace is when people arrive at, I'm not up for that. Yeah. I'm not signing that contract. And we see this a lot. We bring people in under one contract or one set of promises. And then for whatever reason, business needs shift, managers change, whatever. Now, that employee is still working from that baseline of expectation, right? But suddenly the business or the new manager's expectations are totally different, and they're imposing their new ones onto the employee who's going, that's not what I signed up for. Yeah. So unless we give them the chance to go, here's what, do you want to keep signing up for that? And a beautiful outcome is if somebody goes, look, I'm not up for that. I don't think I can do that. Or actually, I don't want to do that. Or if that's what it requires, I'm not doing that because it's going to compromise over here. Beautiful conversation. And suddenly we're having a really elegant conversation about an exit or a redistribution of work or a rejigging of career planning or whatever it is, rather than the unspoken conversation, which just goes to, well, I'll just constrain my contributions and I'll start looking for another job. And I won't let you know because clearly we can't talk about that. And you see that happen all the time in talent management. Beautiful outcome if somebody goes, I'm not up for that. Okay, cool. Let's talk about what you are up for or how we end the relationship gracefully and with respect.
Yeah, and that is often done not so well. It's going to say poorly, but I'll just say
more
not
often
so well.
than not. And when it's done well, it is beautiful to watch. But yes, unfortunately,
and it leads, and you've. I think the most important thing in that is if you're the person who can't sign up to that, commit to that promise, that contract, you walk away with your integrity in place still. And I think that's a really important piece where instead of saying there's only one thing that people can't take off you, that you can choose to give away is your integrity. And in those moments, you're standing up in that space comfortably. And whether someone agrees with you or not, it's kind of irrelevant because
exactly.
Yeah,
so
correct.
Important. Yeah.
One of the that's really cool. There's a bunch of stuff, and I think another tag, and I'll put in there that you offered to people was this conversation around permission and process. And I think I want to go back there because it's really important. We often hear the conversation around, but I gave them permission. They can do it they could do what they wanted, but sometimes a person is locked in a cage. They don't have the key. So you can say, feel free to hop out whenever you want, but they're still in the cage. Help. Sometimes there's a need to have a key. What's the key? What's the process?
I had a CEO a while back say to me, I just don't understand. He said, I stood up at the annual meeting and I said to my top 200 leaders, I'm putting aside $100,000 for, actually, I think it was 500,000. It was like $500,000. It was not insignificant for brand new initiatives that might, return value. And so first in, best dressed, whoever gets access to it. He said, we're 12 months on, I'm about to have the next conference and not one person has accessed it. And I said, well, did you tell them how to access it? Oh, well, no. I'm like, well, you can't just give them permission. Here's a figure, access the funds if they don't know how to do that in a way that makes sense for you. He's like, I literally offered them money. I'm like, yeah, but they're senior leaders. They're going, they're going to expect a return. What is it? What's more important? Well, then try offering it again, this time with a process for applying for it. Shocker, he had more applications than he had money for. So it is really, sorry, I'm making him sound like he was silly. He wasn't silly. He was genuinely confused around why other people wouldn't take an initiative that he himself would feel quite comfortable to take. And the playback on that was, well, that's probably one of the reasons you're the CEO, because you have that instinctive initiative and proactivity that you would do that, but a lot of people don't. So permission plus process becomes really important. Otherwise, you're giving permission, but you're leaving them feeling too vulnerable to move. And people won't, most people won't do the Indiana Jones leap, at the Temple of Doom, where he just takes the leap of faith and he lands on the bridge and it suddenly appears. There's not many of us are Indiana Jones, unfortunately. I'd love to meet a few more. He's pretty cool, but I have to admit myself, I would not have jumped off that ledge. Whereas, give them a little, throw the dust out, let them see that little shape of the bridge at least. Permission plus process. Otherwise, you're asking people to operate on faith, and that's far too vulnerable a state for most people in a work environment.
Especially at a senior level. I don't know.
Especially because you're more exposed, right?
Correct. Yeah. You have more to lose, and you are far more visible. And it's interesting, you often get the CEO or whoever the senior leader who does that type of program and says, I would have, and really?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
Yeah.
Because there's
like
always,
to think you would.
we all tell ourselves that we would, and maybe. And
maybe.
Not, and I think that's something from a leader. So there's people listening at the moment who are kind of going, right, I get that. So, right, Kelly, I've heard all these bits. So I'm going into the head of the people listening and leaders and or people in the team who want to influence in a different way. But it's all going right. So lots of stuff here. As a leader, I've got the fact that I can ask these couple of questions we talked about. How do you contribute and how do I help you? What do you need from me? There's this other piece around just thinking through about the promises that are there, and just that in itself, I think, is gold. If people just realise there's all these promises made that are not defined,
and not delivered on.
And as Kelly said, don't go and run a workshop on undefined promises. That would probably end badly. And if you do, please don't call either of us. We're good. Or if you do want to call us,
no attribution required.
Yes,
if you're going to do that.
Yeah. So if you do want to call Kelly and say we need you to, she'll say that's not what we're not going to do that, but we will do this.
Yeah, but we'll do this. Exactly.
So to do this piece, I'm interested. Like what can people do in a pragmatic way, and not just one-on-one, but even with the team they might be leading, or even if they're leading a business? What's the step one, step two opportunity?
Interesting. So there's a couple of audiences you pulled out there that I think are important to answer this question through a direct lens of that. Firstly is, what if you're not the leader? So what if you're the employee, for example, so not the CEO? You could be a frontline leader. You could be anywhere in the business as not the leader. Now, when it comes to promises in the workplace, you're an equal partner. It's an equal exchange of promise and expectation together, and you are in full power to sign up to or not. Now, the difference with somebody in a positional leadership role versus somebody not is that they just have a level of permission and authority and potentially power to push an agenda if they need to, unconsciously or consciously. So they are naturally in a structural position to start the conversation around how would you like to contribute and what do you need in order to do that. But if you're on the other side of that conversation and your manager's coming to you going, I need you to do this, how you can, your way of shifting that to how can I contribute is oh great, can you help me connect, what's that ultimately trying to achieve? Can you give me more context? So that's you signaling, can you just connect that to the higher reason here? And then you can go, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's the best way to contribute, and you go, okay, I'm in. Or you go, oh yep, happy to do that, could I also suggest this, would this be useful? Could I also do this? So you can start to tweak your offering. So they come to you going, I want this from you. They're basically saying, give me this. And you can go, yeah, I could, or I could give you this. So you can make an offer. Now, to do that well, you have to come up to what's the higher purpose here? What are we trying to achieve? Because only then can you have enough information to go, this is the appropriate contribution. Yep. So you can shift that first part of the conversation that way. And then in the terms of what do you need from me to do that would be the manager question. On the other side of the table, it would be, yep, absolutely happy to do this. In order to do that, I'm going to need this, or I think I'll need this or this. Is that accessible? Can I have that? Or, yeah, I can do this. It would be really helpful if I can just have 30 minutes with you tomorrow. To just check I'm on the right track. Whatever it is you decide you need, or no, we could do that really quickly and that's going to take 50K. Do we have that in the budget? Okay, we might need to do it a little slower. So again, you can start to just own some of the terms of your contribution and just start to flag, this is what I'm going to need in order to do that. And what you start to do is just really flag to somebody that there's interdependency here. So I can go and do what you've asked, but that doesn't mean you're now hands off and coming back to judge whether I've done it or not well. We can start to shift that dialogue. Now that takes practice and it takes a level of confidence and integrity in your own skill set to not just accept that how they're telling you to do it is the best way. So challenge that assumption if you're going to go into this space. Your first thing is, do not assume what you're being asked to do is the best way. Think for yourself, is it? Is that how I want to contribute? And if not, okay, how do I start to have that conversation? So I think that's one really important audience to go, if you're not the manager, you can still approach these conversations like that and start to shift things. If that's the type of relationship and experience you want to be having at work. That's your promise set to choose, not mine. The other audience you pulled out, Andrew, was the HRDs, so our heads of HR, our HR people who are often tasked with, great, how do you do this on scale, please? Yeah. What's the programmatic, what does this look like from a program perspective? Now, there's two ways of encouraging businesses to better manage promises at work. One is programmatic. I would argue there needs to be a level of either maturity or familiarity with a conversation, the conversation that we've said and you've rightly identified start here. So programmatically, before I'm going out broader, I'm going, where are either my social leaders or my positional leaders that I just need to socialize this with first, and they need to start modeling. Before we do anything else, it needs to appear in the workplace. So when you get to programs, it's already feeling familiar. Otherwise, it's just too people either go, oh, it's all that fuzzy stuff, and they distance themselves. We'll just get back to the tasks here.
Yes, yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, most people, Brené Brown does a lot of research in emotions, and it's very sad. It makes me upset to share this, but one of the stats that she brings out is that she did this whole pile of research, and the average number of emotions that most people could name was three emotions: happy, sad, angry. Our ability, we don't train people in managing and putting a language behind how they are feeling, and socio-emotional pieces at work are therefore very difficult for people to articulate. It's like we're asking them to speak a language they haven't been taught yet. So you go straight into programs where you're suddenly talking about this stuff, and people are going to go, no, not yet. Whereas if they've started to have some language come in, even if it's simple language like, oh, how can you contribute? What do you need from me? They've started to see a few things shift that's been put on stage. Then you'd be ready to go into sort of more of a coordinated programmatic way. That's if you're taking a program approach. I think most organisations need to start with a systems and I call it the structure of the business first. So we talked before about businesses being social systems. What's the structure that people are socially moving around? And how do we make sure that those signals are communicating the promises we want? And a very simple example of that I use with clients, and I've introduced into a number of businesses now. And you mentioned earlier, Andrew, we write out a position description. A position description, traditional position description, says here's what you will be doing, here's what you'll be responsible for, might list some KPIs, scale of responsibility, all of that. Very transactional, nothing in there about promises of how the experience will be, and very little in there about promises around what the contribution will be. So we've seen position descriptions morph, particularly at the executive level, into success profiles. An improvement, but still insufficient. They're now very focused on, well, we need them to do this, so we think they'll need these skills and capabilities and experiences to successfully do that, so we'll focus it on this. Awesome for recruiters. Great, they can go and tick their boxes. Still not getting us to a promise exchange. What I've evolved that to again is, let's have a contribution profile. So this, again, it's an evolution. It doesn't get rid of the task list, but it places up front, this role contributes to our purpose, etc., whatever language a business has. Like that's its point. This is the point to this role. Traditional job descriptions don't often say why this role exists. No. So let's just start there. We go, actually, we're hiring you because this is what we're trying to achieve. And then the first section on it is, this is the 3-year mandate. And essentially what that means is, we need somebody to come in and create this shift, or create this experience, or build this. And it's done when it looks like this. So we don't talk a lot like that. We go, here's the tasks, and you'd be managing this. Now that's awesome if it's just to come in and run it and keep it going gig, or a job that is repetitive and procedural and just on repeat. But a lot of jobs now aren't, where actually the value add and the contribution that people want to make and can make is on improvement. It's better, right? Yep. How do we make it better? Define the shift. Do that in terms of a mandate, do that, whatever that looks like. But the contribution profile starts up front with, here's what we need created from this. This is the promise. We're saying come in, and then you can break that down into first 12-month priorities. Again, we're setting promises. These are our non-negotiables. We really need this sort of looked at. I'm still not saying here's what you'll do. I'm saying these are the problems you'll solve. These are the opportunities we want you to come in and explore. And this is ultimately where we want you to shift things to. And then we go, and we think you probably need some of these. So you still got all your other stuff. But so this is often the very first tool that a candidate, internal or external, receives. It should have promise expectations outlined in it, because otherwise that person can't make a choice on if that's something they're interested in being part of. they are just coming in with their assumptions of, oh, a role with all of that responsibility and task. Yep, that looks good on my CV, or I've done that before, or I think it'll be like this. And then they get in and have to navigate all these promises and promise setting. So I'm using that as a simple tool. There's throughout the whole employee life cycle, and anyone in the HR space who's listening, please just take that as one example of go through all of your tools. Where are your talent management tools and processes? And where are the steps within them that have opportunity to set a promise or set an expectation or ask a question of, this is what we'd be expecting. Prompt that for dialogue. Makes for a far more interesting interview at recruitment as well. So you can do that all the way through all of your training courses, basically any performance management conversations, everything that sits under talent management can be tweaked quite simply to just input a little. Often it's a language thing that just prompts the manager to have a conversation. So I think that was a very long answer to your question. I think I have answered
good.
it.
I think you have. and I think that the seed I keep saying through all of this, and I'm sure people are hearing it, is this is done with, not done to.
Yes,
it talks about co-creation, talk about like cooperation, collaboration, whatever words you want to choose to use. It's with, not to. And
absolutely.
Wherever you can include the individual, do so. Allow them the space, because on a really practical level, tactical even, it's the more ownership they have of, the better they will be engaged with.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And if it's all, here's the thing we've created before, this thing that sits on a pillar and go and worship it. Maybe if there's this co-created piece with, that's something they're going to go, I've actually got an opinion in there. I've got my sweat, blood, tears, whatever is in there. Okay, cool. I'm going to go that a little bit further now. And that matters.
I get asked a lot, how do I create buy-in? I'm like, invite contribution is like literally the only way to get buy-in and skin in the game and everything. Felt accountability.
Yep.
You don't get that by telling people what to do. You get that by them committing themselves to, hey, I can do this. And it's not just white collar either. I want to pull that out as well. This applies to anybody. As I said at the start, I started out as a frontline worker. It's no different. It's what are the system pieces that allow, and the permission and the process for you to hear from them firstly. So to your point earlier, they've got to have a way of contributing, but you don't have to pull everybody. It was impossible to pull crew out of the aircraft to just pause the plane for a second at 40,000 feet. Let's just jump over here. We just need to have a nice workshop and talk about what's going on. No. But you can find other ways of sourcing that, or the airline I flew for the managers used to hop on the plane, and they just, whenever you had a break between service, they just go, hey, what's going on? What can we improve? Awesome company at that time, because they did things like that. They'd just walk out on the floor and say, hey, you guys are doing this all the time. How could it be better? What do you need us to do to make your jobs easier or better? And again, you do have to follow the steps of, they need to understand what we're trying to achieve. So frame it up. It's like, you guys are doing an awesome job. We've had feedback from customers that quality's like here. If you were to make that better, what would you guys be doing? Questions like that, and that, again, just inviting the dialogue with people. It's even more effective with frontline workers. It's not just with knowledge workers or senior leaders. It's at any point of career. And I've had a lot of conversations recently about intergenerational workforces, because we've now got the 5 workforces and hybrid work, and everyone's like, oh, how do we bring them all together? I'm like, and I keep coming back to, they're all still humans. Just recognize that people are at different points. Somebody who's at mature career should not need 3 days to do something that somebody at, coming in who's only 5 years in career will be correct. So if that person finishes in a day, great. But if we're expecting the 3, they'll probably take it if they don't see any point to offering further contribution. So again, it's just have the conversation and recognize that people will bring different things to that. It does take a level of vulnerability and courage to sit there and respond. And I don't think we respond with enough respect and appreciation to frontline, as well as we do potentially to more sort of knowledge workers who maybe have a better way of bringing it forward themselves. But it does apply across the board, is my point.
Yeah, you're spot on. And so I'm going to scream behind that and say, yes, preach on, sister, because there's a lot of the work we do is frontline orientation, high risk operational workforces. And it's so often we see organisations, here I go hiding behind that term, so often we see people expecting of those frontline individuals, you've got to do it this set way because we're telling you how you can be safe.
Yeah.
Versus actually asking for some contribution. And the work we do, one of the key steps of what we do is simple model, thinking about work as it's done, and work is designed, documentation, etc. Work is imagined. What do the bosses, leaders, supervisors think is happening? And the last one's work is done. Second last one, work is done. What are people actually doing? Yeah. And the most important one for us, work is desired. If you were king or queen for the day, what would you do? And the gold that sits between those four pillars is just huge. Yeah. And to steal a psychological word, that's where you get to workers flow.
Absolutely,
and it isn't 100%. It's a lovely 80 to 90, and that's awesome because those four will never fully align for lots of reasons. But as long as they're congruent, the organisation should be content.
Yeah.
But I agree. I think it's
making
absolutely
it overt
important.
and giving them the opportunity to opt out.
Yes.
Again, equally important. Because if everyone else is signing up and they're going, oh, it's not right for me, then most people will go, yeah, it's not right for me. Like a peer pressure piece, the managers won't have to do that. Peers will work that out. And if you're creating the environment where they can then come and say, look, I'm just not sure that I'm up for that, it then goes, okay, cool. What are you up for? Or how can we support you to go on to your next thing? It's a very different way of approaching it than traditional, oh, well, no, that's what we need done, so you'll just have to suck it up.
Yes, that's what you've got to do. So that's brilliant. We're getting close to, and there's so many other questions I can ask, but I also commit to people that we set about the hour. The 2 questions has now become 4. The original 2 we talked about, and the first one, I think, and I just want to put them out there and get them qualified by you. And the first one is, first step, and it's a question, first step of the process is being clear of where you want to head. What is the goal? Where are we heading? Here's the agenda. Here is clear on expectation.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is around what's not negotiable.
Yeah,
just being clear. It isn't a free for all. Here's a space. That usually there's plenty, and then it comes to the conversations. How do you want to contribute, and what can I do to support you? What do you need from me? I think if people wanted to go and have a play with those 4. Is that a good place to start to play?
Yeah, I think if you're looking to play as an individual, start with the last 2, just with your immediate people around you. Start going, okay, how can I frame this into how are we offering contributions or creating the space? How am I inviting and how am I offering contribution? And then how am I vocalizing what I need or can offer to make that happen? So how can you contribute? What do you need from me to do so? Or if you're on the other side of the table, here's how I could contribute. Here's what I'd need to do so. Start there as an individual. If you're in a role where you're going, I want to scale this a bit, that's where you would come up to the first 2 questions. You cannot scale this until people are clear on what's the whole point. If you're going to go down a programmatic route and bring people together, it is an awesome strategy. As I said, there's probably some pre-work you want to be doing to sort of seed things, but that can be really, really effective. And I've run so many workshops now where you bring people together and managers are, they're not going to contribute, they're not going to do this. They're all over it because we start with, here's what ultimately we're trying to achieve. This is the purpose. We're suddenly talking about purpose, not KPIs. KPIs might come up, but they're not the focus. Here's what we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to achieve. And we're not scripting how we're going to do that. We're actually just describing end state possibilities and inviting. When I'm facilitating, I'll do 2 things. I'll say, okay, so we've heard that. So stop. All right. Firstly, questions to understand this. And then secondly, questions to interrogate, challenge, add, whatever. But firstly, to understand, please. So make sure if you're going to that first question, the gold out of that is aligned understanding. Far too often we skip straight to, right, who has questions? And before people can ask the questions, people have moved into changing it or adding it. So just hold the space there when you're doing the purpose piece. So purpose, what is it we're trying to achieve? Secondly, what's the direction? These are the likely risks and opportunities that we've already identified. And then the invitation is, what are the other ones? What aren't we seeing? This is what we know, but what aren't we seeing that's ahead? This is where you start to really flick into a future readiness conversation, which you need to with promises, because promises are a shared commitment to the future. So you're going, here's what we're trying to achieve. This is the point to it. Let's get clear and make sure we're all, yep, that's good. We're not missing anything. Then it's, here's the direction. We're anticipating this to hit us, risk or opportunity. What are we missing? There's the invitation. And then it's, okay, cool. In context of that, what can you do? And a simple way that I run that, if you're looking for a programmatic approach and you're working with a group, is I will have stations around a room. For example, I've done this with a lot of sales teams, and we go, this is what we're trying to achieve. So you start by putting everything out there. You have those two conversations, what we're trying to achieve, here's what we think is coming that we need to anticipate and juggle. Now, in context of all of that, in this corner of the room, there's what can you as individuals do as you leave this room now to start contributing to that? And what do you need from the execs standing here or the managers or whoever to do that? And you don't need anything else. It's just you can do that now, agreeing as a team. In this corner of the room, it's what do you need your managers to, in order, what do you think we could do that requires something of the managers before we can do it? And in this corner, it's, and what do you think we can do to achieve this? But you're going to need the support of more senior again. And sometimes, particularly sales team, I'll have my fourth corner, and this is what we'd need from suppliers or customers or a union or whatever is sort of contextually. Now, this one here, the first one of what can you do now that you don't need anything else, you can start now. That's the most powerful. They literally leave the room going, yeah, we're going to do this. And they stand up and they go, we're going to do this to add to all of this. And then they don't even need the permission from the managers, the workshops, the permission. They just go, right. So suddenly we've given them process, right? We've given them, break it down for me, for your process, for what you need. Now, you're saying you're going to do this and you don't need anything from anyone else to go and do it as a team. Cool. How do you want us to check in and hold you account on that and make sure you don't need something added? So those are the types of conversations I'd be encouraging, and a very simple structure is just pull it out. What you're doing with that is going, where does the promise sit? The promise here at that, what can you do as this team, and you don't need anything from anyone else, you can just agree to do that. That's the promise among team members. The board of, now, what do you think you can be done, but you're going to need some support or resources or whatever that facilitated by your managers. That's the promise between those employees and the manager. And then the board over here with executives, support or whatever it is, same thing again. All you're doing is breaking the promises down and getting really clear and overt agreement that, yeah, that's what it is. Okay, and let's regroup. So hopefully that's a bit of a tangible.
Yeah, it's awesome. There. It's really tangible. And I would, my counsel in this moment would be absolutely play. My other reflection would be, if this is of significance, talk to someone. Please talk to Kelly and actually ask for some help, because this work is significant in setting. Often it's a choice. People often come to this place. My experience, and I'll test this with you, Kelly. They kind of go, "What's been doing ain't working. We need to do something a bit different." How do we engage differently? How do we operate differently? How do we do it differently? And inside of that is often where we want to get to this place of promises. There's often broken ones. So
that have to be healed.
The acknowledgement of what didn't go so well. So it's so there's a whole other process there. I would say play with it. And if it's a significant piece, Kelly's info will be all underneath this podcast. Yeah. Give her a call, have a chat. And you've only heard a snippet of her brain, so there's so much more.
Just a little bit of slice. But at the end of the day, it's as simple as, if this is resonating with you, just look around, and you can start with yourself too. You don't even have to start with other people. You can start by saying, how do I want to contribute? And if I was working with somebody, I do career coaching occasionally with people as well. And it's the first question I ask. Don't assume that what you set with the promise you made with yourself when you were a 20-year-old grad about what a good career looked like. Have you asked yourself that question since? Because as a 30-year-old, it's going to look different. And as a 40-year-old, it probably looks different again. So are you actually checking in on the promises you've made to yourself by asking, hang on, what's important to me right now and how do I want to contribute through my career? And what do I need to be able to do that? And be prepared for that to throw some stuff up. You might go, yeah, actually, I'm exactly where I need to be. Awesome. Good validation on your current career role choice. But you might also throw that up and go, oh, I'm not really able to fully contribute. I'm probably at 60% there. And yeah, I'm feeling a little frustrated. And maybe it's because I really want to contribute in this way and I'm not currently able to. Oh, what do I need to be able to do that? Okay. And kind of just can open up your thinking a bit just personally. Now, if you're doing that for yourself first, you're automatically going to be shifting the promises you're making with the people around you anyway, because you start to vocalize, this is what's important to me in a work relationship. And by relationship, I don't mean person to person. I mean you to the system of humans in which you are working and experiencing life. So start with yourself. What's your own contract or promise to yourself with regards how you contribute through your career? Awesome question.
And as Kelly said, it'll kick into the community that sits around you. It isn't just work; it will be relationships, family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or it will touch all those places. So great recommendation.
And orange box, fair warning.
Yes, and yes, maybe a little lumpy, but at the same time will be incredibly valuable if you push through that piece.
Yeah,
that's really good. Last question we always ask, but before I go there, also that is just being I'll use a big word for me, plethora of information, just huge amount of info inside that space, and I think people will find it deeply practical and useful. So thank you, Kelly, as a parting gift to them. On top of, we're looking for the cherry now. We've had the cake, we've had the icing. Now we're looking for the sprinkles of the cherry. One thing, one thought, just one that if nothing else, think about this, people who are listening. This is from Kelly.
Avoid over-engineering or overcomplicating this. It's actually as simple as, how do I want to contribute and what does that take? And it's interesting, the temptation often is to zoom right into all the details and over-engineer it and straight away we're constraining, and we're very, very good at constraining ourselves. If we come right back to the point of this podcast, and people who are listening are, I hope, already in this headspace of just keep it simple, of how do I want to contribute to better? What does it take for me to contribute to better? And what are the small tweaks and changes I can make in the world around me, or the systems and ways of leading and navigating talent in a business that do that without, you don't have to scrap everything and start again with these concepts. The promise already exists. All you need to do is tap into it and go, okay, what if I just reframed it like that? So keep it simple, avoid over-engineering, and start with yourself first from a frame of better.
Yeah, serving self is not self-serving inside this space. Well, I got to say that better people, better business is better for your conversation and your wisdom. It's been an absolute delight. As we said, as we always say, there'll be some info in the show notes below around how to contact Kelly. If you'd like to find out more, there's all the usuals, the social type world, her website, etc. But all that detail will be there. And lucky to everybody, Kelly's kind of had a deliberate hiatus for a little window of time, and she's back. And I think it's really exciting. Where done a lot of thinking around. That's another conversation for another day, but lots of great thinking through that window, and back out there and having amazing conversations with people, and keen to help transition organisations through the type of conversation we had today. So thank you, Kelly. It's been a delight.
My absolute pleasure, Andrew. Thank you so much. It's an awesome opportunity to contribute to a dialogue that needs to be amplified around better. That's what's carrying us forward to the future. So thank you for having me on the show.
It is a pleasure. And to everyone who listened, thank you for your time and patience. And as always, if you want to have a chat, give us a holler. Always open for a conversation, a yarn, or any other frame. And again, thank you for listening. And I hope you've got something out of it, and have a fantastic day.